Okay, I think we're going to make a start now. So thank you all for coming and giving up some of your lunchtime or whatever time it happens to be for you to listen to this webinar and to participate. So thank you. So this webinar is the RCSLT's second in the series on the professional development framework. So this is number 2 of 4. And we are going to be concentrating on this one on the core components of the professional development framework. Hannah, could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm just going to start with a bit of housekeeping. Thank you. So there is Hannah, the lovely Hannah is in the background moving the slides for us, and Justinia is our RCSLT host, and she's available on the via the chat button. The chat button is the single speech bubble icon. So if you've got any technical queries or any general queries, please get in touch with her that way. If you want to send questions to the panel, please use the Q&A button, and that is 2 speech bubbles, and you can see those on the bar there. So Q&A for questions about the content, chat button for any technical things. Okay, and just so you know, this event is being recorded and will be made available on the RCSLT website, along with the presentation slides. We also are compiling, because this is one of 4, we are compiling a very big Q&A document of all the questions that come in through all the webinars, which we will be sharing at the end of this. So the more questions you send, the greater the value and a lovely piece of information we can create for you. Okay, so today you can also join in chat via social media. So if you're interested in using X, you can see that there is a hashtag at the bottom of the screen. So do join in conversations like that. And just to know that there is a QR code at the bottom right of the screen if you want to link in with any of the other events as well. Okay, and I think the remaining things I have to say is to introduce our lovely guests. So we have a special guest, Jan Baselman, who's an independent practitioner, but she also sits on the 2 RCSLT panels, and also is part of ASLTIP as well. So she's a very busy lady, and possibly for that reason, she can only be with us for about 10 minutes today, but she has a wealth of very useful information to share with us. And I also have my colleague, Mark Singleton, who is our Learning and Development Manager, who will then be taking you through some of the detail of the framework, looking at those core components and how it links in with other resources that you might use. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, I seem to have already skipped through the introduction, so okay. So yes, just some quick refresher bits. The framework is available on our website in our learning section, and there is a link on screen, but also for those of you who have mobile phones available, you can scan that QR code to go straight to that site. It is a document with many 3 sections. It's quite substantial, but that's because it just has so much rich information inside that you can use as flexibly as you want, and I think Jan is going to go into that a bit more later. Can I have the next slide, please, Hannah? Thank you, Hannah. So today we're going to be looking at the core components, and unsurprisingly, when I say core, that means the bits in the middle. So if you see those the blue circle in the middle with the arrows mean they're sort of interconnected. It was very hard to sort of differentiate between them, but those are the things that flow through the SLT career. So they are practitioner wellbeing, impact, inclusion and diversity, sustainability, and co-production. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. You will see on the outside 4 different coloured sections. They are what we're going to be discussing in the next webinar, and those are the domains of practice. Okay, can I have the next slide, please, Hannah? Thank you. Yes, so what are the core components? They're really sort of guiding principles in the framework that relate to speech and language therapy. Each of those themes that I mentioned has a series of reflexive questions, and some of those will spark really rich discussions about how am I achieving sustainability in my role, for example. What can I do around EDI myself what do I need to think about with impact? What's in my control and what can't I do? So I think those are very important questions. So those 5 areas all have the same set of reflective questions, which really spark rich reflection and discussion. And they are aligned with the RCSLT strategic objectives as well. And they link very closely to, if you look at frameworks around the nations, they will link very closely to AHP requirements for those as well. Okay, great. I think that's my last bit of introduction. And now I will hand over to Jan. Thank you, Jan.
Hi, everyone. Vicky and Mark have asked me today to talk about how I've used the tool, the professional development framework, and I've used it in 2 different ways. So I've used it partly for my own sort of self-appraisal and partly to support my supervisees with their CPD and looking at their own learning and development. So I'm going to sort of look at it in 2 separate sections, if you like. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So firstly, why did I use the tool? I used it because I'm shifting away from working with children to leadership roles, and I wasn't sure whether to stop working with children. And when I went through and sort of rated myself on things and reflected on my career, it really affirmed for me that this was the right decision and that my skills lay much more in leadership and strategy and innovation rather than clinical work. And I'd sort of gone over the hill, if you like, and was kind of coming down the other side. And I wasn't so motivated by clinical work as I was. So that was a really big affirmation, I guess, that the tool gave me. And so now here I am doing more leadership stuff, taking part in an RCSLT webinar. Another thing that I found from looking from all the self-ratings in the domains of practice bit that you're covering in the next webinar was that writing and updating policy detail had never really been an area of interest or skill for me. And I thought perhaps in my next phase of work, I need a business manager or a PA or something with knowledge and skills in those areas to fill gaps. So that was a good outcome. And there aren't necessarily direct questions in the framework about these things, but the framework leads you to reflect on what your gaps are that you can then fill. So when I completed the wellbeing section, there are a bunch of questions that you're asked in the wellbeing section, sort of, what does wellbeing look like for you? What can you keep doing? What can I do more of? And that led me to tot up the hours that I spent on unpaid profession supporting activity. And I decided that was too many hours. So I decided to redress the balance and cut down on some of the unpaid work that I was doing and concentrate more on innovation and paid work. So there's no right or wrong way to use the tool. And I think I was a little obsessed at first at thinking, oh, I don't know how to use it. I can't get started with it. And certainly my supervisees came to me saying, I don't know how to use it. Will you help me get started? And I realized there's no right and wrong way. You can pick and choose from bits of it. And it's just this multi-tool, like one of those multi-tools with blades and scissors and things that you can choose to use in any different way you like. But I did make some mistakes along the way, so I'll let you know about those so that you don't make the same ones. So initially I thought, well, I'll allow 2 hours to complete the framework, and much as you would say in an NHS appraisal. And I'd barely got started within these 2 hours and realised it's not just an appraisal tool, it's so much more. And it's best done a little a day over a couple of weeks or even months, and recording one's reflections as one goes along, if you like, and then discussing things along the way with peers and with my supervisor. So that's how I've got the most of it, by having it as a tool in the background that I'm looking at, maybe rating a bit more, maybe adding things to, looking at again. Yeah, don't do what I did with the 2.5 hours thing. That didn't work. So I found it's a very kind and flexible tool, and my career has been a bit less conventional, I think, you know, going independent into independent practice and innovating and writing articles and things like that. But all that can be included in this lovely reframing of a career, which isn't like a ladder. It's looked at like a river, and it has twists and turns and challenges and bumps, and that's both myself and my supervisees have found this analogy really comforting, I would say, and again, affirming as to it's okay to try things and they don't work out. That was a bump in the river, or that was a little tributary that you went down, didn't lead anywhere, and you're coming back now, and that's okay. So that's been another helpful element. While I was filling things in on the tool, I actually printed it out, but there is an online version coming soon, which I'm sure Mark will have spoken about or will speak about at some point. So I printed it out and rated myself on the tool, a paper version. And as I was filling things in, I kept thinking of actions, and then I'd start doing the actions. And so this is another reason it took me a long time. So for example, tiny things like on the sustainability questions, what are you doing? What does sustainability look like for you? What could you do more of? What could you do less of? I sort of thought, oh, well, we're running low on paper. So I quickly emailed the administrator and said, oh, can you get some more paper, but can you make it recycled this time? So even just reading and rating myself, I became a sort of more sustainable therapist in the process of doing the rating and taking tiny little actions along the way. And I'm now reading from recycled paper, you'll be pleased to hear. Another change that I made personally was I found it really difficult to rate myself on the non-clinical aspects. I found it much easier to rate where I was clinically with assessments and therapy and things. But when you come on to the next webinar, L26 to 31, the leadership numbers, there's some questions about, are you a compassionate and inclusive leader? And I thought, well, it's not really for me to say, oh, how compassionate am I? I think I am. But so what I ended up doing was changing my 360 staff appraisal to ask for ideas on how I could be a more compassionate and inclusive leader and get their views. So again, that was another thought that happened from the process of completing the tool, which led to a change in practice. Needless to say, they gave me a nice long list. Okay, next slide, please. So I have a bunch of about 25 supervisees across the country who are all in independent practice. And they often come to me with various issues that are non-clinical or clinical. And many come to me with work-life balance issues and well-being issues. So this, just having this well-being component, which is the simplest set of questions in the framework, has given me a framework to work through well-being issues with supervisees. And it's sort of given me more of a basis to encourage supervisees to practice self-care. And having this well-being section, it's almost given myself and other supervisees permission to look after ourselves, as if this is vital, right? It's one of the core components. You've got to look after yourself. So let's do something about it. And that has been hugely helpful. One supervisee was reflecting on issues that were arising in her practice and realised some underlying personal barriers and some quite unhelpful patterns of behaviour that she might need to seek help around from other professionals, such as counselling, therapy, or life coaching. And we kind of came to that conclusion together through asking the questions in the wellbeing framework and reflecting on those. In a very recent session, a supervisee came to me with the very legitimate question of what CPD should I do next year? And so in supervision, we talked this through, but instead of deciding what courses to do, she's now looking at her competencies through using the framework to see where she's lacking in skills, but has interest and motivation. So instead of just thinking, hey, what course? It's more like going deeper than that and really in a very sort of organised fashion, looking at skill gaps and need and perhaps risk. What are the riskiest things that she doesn't know about? To then inform, to get a more informed idea about what CPD she should undertake. And another example of using it with supervisees is that an independent practice manager and I discussed how she could use the framework for her staff appraisals. So she has taken elements of the framework and altered them a little bit to suit her practice and is now using them for staff appraisals. So let's move to the next slide. So, as I said, this is so much bigger than a self-appraisal tool, and the conversations and changes that have that have arisen for my supervisees and myself are really the conversations that the completing the tool has led to. And then that moves somewhere else, and that moves somewhere else, and that moves somewhere else. So I think the reflections on my strengths and interests led me to applying for the acting, learning and development role, director role at RCSLT, which I've been doing for 8 months now, and concludes with me facilitating the RCSLT conference a week on Friday. So I'm not sure whether I would have come to the conclusions that I'd come to about where I needed to go without the tool. So I think it sped up some changes for me. It sort of started the conversations in my own head and with my peers about what next career-wise. So I'd really recommend going through it if you're at a career junction or if you're uncertain about a new direction. And I also think giving yourself a really long period of time to make decisions while you mull over things, giving yourself permission to have 6 months of indecision or even a year of indecision before you take the next curve in your river is an important way to use the tool. It's not an overnight thing. So I think the tool gave me the confidence to leap into some new things. So it gave me assurance or evidence that I had a skill set to do something different. And I'm partly still exploring what the rest of that might look like. But another lovely example from the EDI questions is that I am running this study day at RCSLT, and I've included a talk on equality, diversity and inclusion because of the questions on the framework, which asked me, what are you doing about EDI? And I thought, probably not enough. And that led me to think, well, what can I do? Where could I make a change? And it just made me think ahead a bit. So that's probably it for now. I hope that's given you some ideas about how you can use the tool in your practice. Back to Vicky.
Thank you, Jan. That was amazing. Always inspirational. So I loved the way you talked about using some of the different core elements in your work and with your supervisees, and also how it led you to some personal change and sort of reflections, and then also with the people that you influence, your supervisees, and how it's led to change there. And yeah, really interesting to hear about how you realized you needed to take a bit more time, but that's okay, because it is a tool that allows you to have permission to take the time to reflect and not rush into things just because you feel you have to do a course. So that's really useful. Thank you so much. I believe you have to head off now because of your very busy life, but thank you so much for coming along today. And I hope if listeners have got any questions for you, please do put them in the Q&A, and we will be in touch with Jan to get those answers to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. So now over to my colleague Mark to, now that Jan's given us an overview of some of those areas, to segue a bit deeper into the core components. Over to you, please, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you, Vicky. And although she's now already left, thank you to Jan as well. So I think what I'm going to do here, and as Jan has kind of alluded to, well, not even alluded to, but openly stated, the framework, we've designed it to be really quite flexible, to hopefully work for as many different people in as many different situations as possible. So I'm going to be going through the core components and kind of talking through some of the things we hoped, at the very least, these core components would allow you to do, but this is by no means an exhaustive list. And above all else, what we'd encourage you to do is treat the reflective questions as that opportunity to take a step back and consider what it means to you in your career at this present moment, what it might mean to you in your career in a year, or whatever kind of time frame you're looking at. We didn't design the framework at all to be prescriptive. So like I said, I'm going to talk through some of the things we hope will be useful, but above all else, we encourage you to use the tool for yourself and to explore it, play around with it, and try things with it. And I think that's hopefully where people are going to get the most impact from, which was a delightfully unintended segue into the first core component, impact. So in general terms, what we thought the impact component could be about, we live in an increasingly stat and data-driven world, and particularly in the workplace, return on investment and kind of the difference people make is becoming increasingly discussed. And so with the impact reflective question set, what we wanted people to be able to do was, again, that idea of taking a step back from the day-to-day and thinking about and considering the benefit you bring to your service users, the positive difference you make to the lives of the people you interact with. And obviously from a wellbeing point of view, that's so important, that emotional connection with your work. And I know I don't wish to speak for everyone, but I know for me personally, sometimes it's quite easy to get a bit caught up in the day-to-day and forget why we do what we do. And so, we sort of see the impact reflection set as a way of stepping back, considering that, bringing back some of that emotional connection. And like I said, we all have reports to write as well, and thinking about, the impact of our services is also quite a useful thing to take a step back and do every so often as well. In terms of resources to help with that kind of thinking, the RCSLT's route can be really useful for that kind of raw data collection. It's very outcomes focused. Obviously, the slides will be made available afterwards, so those hyperlinks you'll be able to click on the slides. But there's all sorts of useful information and resources on our web pages around the route for anyone that's interested. And there's also now I don't know huge about this because this is research based, but the Victor tool for looking at impact within research. And again, there's a whole host of useful information about the Victor tool on that hyperlink there for anyone who maybe is more in more of a research-based role, or is considering moving into a research-based role, or is just honestly just curious about how they could measure the impact of research a little more. But if I could have the next slide, please, Hannah. Lovely, thank you very much. So like Jan said, again, we kind of deliberately placed practitioner wellbeing as a core component. As far as we're aware, this is the first framework of its kind to do so, to kind of specifically put your health and wellbeing as a core component. Obviously, most frameworks will reference practitioner wellbeing at some point. As far as we're aware, this is the only framework that kind of specifically mentions it. And you know, on a personal level, it was incredibly important to us to do that. But it's important to remember that your health and well-being, and again, Jan mentioned this with one of her supervisees, your health and well-being does have an effect on how you perform your role, how you do your day-to-day job. And so for us, the well-being component was all about helping people take that time to step back and think about what they want from a career. Are they getting it? And again, Jan mentioned that idea of work-life balance. Everyone's perfect work-life balance will be different. There's no right or wrong answer for how much of your time you want to spend at work versus how much you want to spend outside of work. That's a very personal thing for you to decide. But what we wanted to do with these reflective questions was enable you, again, to take the time to step back and think about, what is my balance? What would I like it to be, and where is it? And do those two largely marry up, or am I doing more work than I'd like to? Maybe I'm doing less work than I'd like to. And how do I start considering where to go from here based on that? And you know, I think this is above all else a very personal part of the framework. It's for you to consider what you're looking for in a career, and honestly, if you're getting that as well. And again, in terms of resources, there's the winter edition of the bulletin was themed around well-being for members, for practitioner well-being. So there's a hyperlink to, again, when you get the access to the slides, there's a hyperlink to that edition for those of you who haven't kind of had it dropped on your doorstep. And Hannah, if I could have the next slide. Marvelous, thank you. So there's going to be a bit of a theme with these last three, in that as much as they work very well as personal reflective question sets, they're also really valuable to reflect on, maybe within your team, within your department, depending on kind of the size of the company you work for, maybe even reflect as an overall company. Obviously, for large NHS trusts, that's maybe challenging. But the inclusion and diversity one, and as Vicky said at the start, all of these are tied into RCSLT strategic aims as well. But this is really all about our desire to be a more inclusive profession, make a move towards a more diverse profession. And it's no secret this is an important focus area for many organisations as well. And how we saw these reflective questions working was almost like a check-in for people. So it's not something you kind of approach once and then never consider again. It's something you can use to take a step back, think about what you've done so far, the impact that's had, and what you intend to do maybe in the next 6 months or a year, or however long you want to set your timeframes for. And then kind of come back within that 6 month or year period and see, what have we done? What have we improved on? Where do we still want to improve on? And again, I'm going to say this again throughout. These are just ideas. This is not an exhaustive list of things you can use these questions for. So please don't take this as kind of an obligatory approach to the to these sections. And again, sorry, just getting a little bit dry. In terms of resources, there's the RCSLT Diversity, Inclusion and Anti-Racism Hub, which has a whole host of resources linked to it. And I know, a lot of the NHS has a EDI hub as well. There are plenty of resources out there, but as a starting point, the RCSLT hub can be quite a useful kind of start. And again, Hannah, if I go slide, please. Lovely, thank you. I really liked Jan's example on the sustainability one, where just reading the question made her think, oh, maybe we could use recycled paper instead. But like I said, especially with these last few, these are not just kind of personal focus areas. We're very aware that these are likely to be big focus areas for organisations as well. Very aware the NHS has things like the Greener NHS initiative, but really this component was all about encouraging people to consider ways in which they can be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, and like with the others, this can be very good to kind of reflect on both individually and as a team, as a department, and again use as a check-in more than anything else. Kind of think, all right, what have we done so far, and how's that working? Has that made improvements? And what more can we do? What more would we like to do? Where would we like to focus? And again, like I said, there's for those that work with the NHS, there's the Greener NHS hub, which has a whole host of useful resources. And there's also the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, which was remarkably hard to say, which again has some very good resources for sustainability within healthcare. And Cameron, if I could again have the next slide. Thank you. So co-production is kind of the final one from us. And again, co-production is a key focus area for a lot of organisations, not just the RCSLT. But really, it was the questions were designed to help people start to think about how they involve service users in your practice. How you engage them in improvements you want to make, or how you engage them in kind of your practice design, your service design. And like the others, it's good to reflect on personally, individually, but can also work really well to reflect on as a team, as a department, to really think about what are we doing to bring service users into how we work. And for some teams, who are our service users? Are we exactly clear on who they are and how we interact with them? And again, like with all of them, this isn't necessarily a kind of stop in once and that's it, you're done forever type scenario. It's very useful to check in regularly to help you track how you're doing, if you're kind of still on the right track, if there's changes you need to make, if a particular idea or theme isn't maybe working out the way you thought it would. Is it time to move away from that? Like Jan said, the idea of, are you heading down a dead end tributary, and do you need to backpedal and get back onto the main river? I'm in danger of overextending that metaphor, so I'm gonna step away from that, I think. In terms of resources, there's some really useful NIHR guidance on co-production. But again, the NHS I know has some very useful co-production resources as well. Most organisations will. And I believe that's me done. It was a whistle-stop tour. So I will hand back to Vicky, but on the understanding that I am here to field questions as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark, for that comprehensive and yet fast walk through all of the core areas and linking in with some of the resources that are available if you're unsure what they mean. That's really good, thanks. So we've had Jan talking about how it's worked on the ground for her, and her supervisees and just the general reflections and changes that it made to her. Mark talking a bit more detail about some of those areas. And so now really it's open to participants. If you have any questions about this, how you might use the framework to look at those areas, impact, inclusion and diversity, sustainability, co-production or practitioner wellbeing. If you have any questions about that, please do use the Q&A button. If you have any more general questions about the framework, we're very happy to answer those. If there's a bit of silence and no one comes forward with a question, we do have some pre-questions that people sent in during the registration period. So I think I'm going to probably give you a little pause to have a ponder and start with some of those pre-questions, if that's all right. But do get in touch with the Q&A. So we have, I think one of the sort of wider, more widely applicable questions is one from an anonymous person who asked, do you have suggestions on how to build this into trust policies? Which is a really good question. So you may all think, you know, that sounds great, but how am I going to get my colleagues to think this is a good idea too? So yeah, it will vary on where you are, but wherever you are, you should have a speech and language therapy lead. If you're in England, you should have a lead in your AHP faculty and council. But if you're in Wales, there are equivalents in the health boards there. In Northern Ireland, there are social care trusts, health and social care trusts, and there are boards in Scotland. So look out for your SLT lead wherever you are and get in touch with them and talk to them about this if they don't already know. It'd be great if some of those leads are already on these calls or engaged. That would be fantastic. And also think about what can you talk about with them in terms of the framework? Do you have evidence where maybe it's been effective for you or your staff? Think about linking in with their priorities. So identifying those pain points in sort of wider systems such as retention and well-being of staff, and talk about how it's important for safety, the need to keep developing your workforce to maintain that safety, the need to invest in your workforce to retain people and keep them happy, and how can the framework help with that? So think about what's to gain from their point of view if they're if you need some sort of pointers for conversations. And Mark, would you have anything to add on that?
I don't think so, to be honest. That was an awesome answer. I think all I would say is, you know, none of the stuff will happen overnight. I think, you know, Jan mentioned that on a personal level and for her supervisees, and it's exactly the same on a trust level. Nothing will happen overnight. And more than anything else, please don't get disheartened if it doesn't happen immediately. Just keep going with it. Yeah. Thank you.
That's a very good point. And to help with that, Mark and I are going around to as many places as we can to make sure people are aware of this. So hopefully people who are the SLT leads in different areas will hear about this from us as well. So, and if you need some help, just get in touch. Okay, we haven't got any Q&A questions live yet, so I'm going to go maybe to the next question, which could the use of the framework support development to AHP, so allied health profession? We did mull over this and we weren't quite sure what it meant, but we're going to go with, depending on what the meaning is, going to go with two different answers. So if the person who sent this in, and maybe you're here now and you can give some guidance in the Q&A, if you meant, can it support development for a student to be an AHP, then yes. So it's a really good point of reference, and we think it's useful for students to have sight of this and to start looking at it and to think about the career opportunities they may have. But to bear in mind that they'll already have a very packed curriculum, and then they'll be going on to their NQP goals. So they've probably got their hands full in terms of the day-to-day. But it's good for a sort of vision piece about, you know, I'm on placement in this acute facility. That's quite interesting. What kind of career could I have if I wanted to pursue this, or if I'm working in, say, a community and I'm really liking it? Where are the possibilities here? So yes, if the person who posed the question was talking about supporting development AHP as a student, then that's what we say. It's a good point of reference, but probably bear in mind that those people already have a lot on. But if the person who posed this question was talking more about stretching it out to other AHPs, other allied health professionals, then yes, as well, we have heard of examples of services which are using this framework beyond speech and language therapy with other allied health professions as well. I think both Jan and Mark talked about the flexibility of the framework, and certainly it's flexible enough to be to help some of those conversations, maybe in an adapted way, but we do know it's being trialed in other places. Oh, someone sent in a question. How do you see it linking in with the NQP competencies from Hazel? That's a really good question. We are actually now starting to look at the NQP goals because they are due for a review. That work has just started a few weeks ago. We'll also be reviewing at the same time the curriculum guidance as well. So we are looking at how both the curriculum guidance and the NQP goals align with the professional development framework. At the moment, the framework sort of sits at the level beyond the NQP competencies, but we really want to have closer alignment. We want to be able to tell a story of, so now you're a student, these are the pieces of guidance and in your chapter of your story as a student, but then this is what happens when you become an NQP, and this is what happens in your career. We realize we had to start somewhere, so we started with the framework, and now we're sort of going back of the other areas. So there is alignment in terms of some of the themes, but we need to do some work on that. So if you're interested, look out for messages in our e-newsletter and on our current projects page about all of this. Anything to add, Mark?
Not specifically, no. I think just obviously we want the competencies to tie in to the framework, but the framework is largely designed for kind of post NQP practitioners. That's not to say, again, like Vicky said, it's not to say students and NQPs can't look at the framework, start considering things based on the framework, but they have a lot of other stuff going on while they're students and NQPs. We don't want people feeling overwhelmed by everything. So, major focus will need to be competencies and then the framework.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Then I don't think we've got any more live questions, so I might go to our last registration question. So someone asked, can it be used to support writing job descriptions for consultant posts? Yeah, and I talked to colleagues about this to get a fuller understanding. Yes, generally, because it's, as we talked about, quite a flexible tool, and you can see some of those areas that you might want a consultant to do. But I did talk to colleagues about this, and it seems that more often than not, people have to write their own job descriptions once they get to this level. We have looked at opportunities to develop a general template, but feedback suggested that this is not the most helpful, because when you get to that level, you may be doing a very wide variety of stuff. We did develop an advanced clinical academic job description, and I do have some links to that I might try to put into the chat, unless, Mark, you have access to those. If you could put those in, that would be great, thanks. So we have one on clinical academic. We also have an example for acute and in neuroscience as well. If you need further help with doing job descriptions for that level, we can provide guidance from a leadership or clinical advisor, and you would just need to get in touch with our colleague Tom and his team and our professional inquiries group to have some more support there. Mark, did you manage to find those links?
I did, but I appear to not be able to message. Oh, no, I can. Ignore me.
Thank you so much. Okay, while we're doing that, we have a question from Anonymous. How do you choose which reflective questions to start with? or do you just complete bit by bit, work through it over time, and this will give you an overview of where you are at as a therapist? Mark, did you want to take that one?
Yes, I can do. I'm also just going to announce for everyone that I think it's only us as panelists who can see the chat. So that's fun. So we will include that link in the post-event email to everyone. And yes, sorry, I was kind of going through that. Which reflective questions would you start with? In a sense, I think the logical first question would be, for any of the core components, what does that component mean to you in your role? So, if it's, say, inclusion and diversity you're looking at, what does that mean to you in your role? Or if you're reflecting as a team, what does it mean to you as a team? Because once you've got and it might be that you can answer that very quickly, or it might take some thought and some pondering. But either way, once you've got that as your kind of starting point, that then really allows you to start exploring how you can focus on it and work on it and develop it. This is, this is general advice as opposed to kind of a mandated approach to it. If it works better for you to start with a different question, please do. I actively encourage people to play around, try different approaches and see what works for you. Above all else, that's how we saw this working, that people could start at the middle, start at the end, whatever works. But yeah, I think as a starting point on a personal level, I'd probably start by defining what it means to me. And I'm in danger of rambling now, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Mark. That's perfect. Yeah, so think about the relevance to you, which is really how you should do the whole framework. As Jan said, she set out thinking she was going to do it all, and then she realised she had to sort of split it up into the bits she needed at the time. Okay, thank you. We've got one more live question in from Sarah, who says, could you advise me who could answer a question on the support worker framework on behalf of a support worker colleague, please? We can do that probably. It's outside the scope of this webinar, but if you contact our info@rcslt.org email address, they will be able to help with that and put you through to the right person. It's slightly differently aligned, but yes, it's a new framework, and I'm sure that you have lots of questions about it. Okay, great, thank you, Sarah. Does anyone else have any questions? I see there's a lot going on in the chat, but I think that might just be Mark's links.
Me trying and failing to send links, yes.
Okay, we will make sure that those links that Mark sent are put into the FAQs. Okay, any more questions? While we wait to see if there are any final questions, just to say that, as we mentioned, this is the second of 4 webinars. The next one will focus on the 4 domains of practice. So those are professional practice, facilitation of learning, evidence research and innovation, and leadership and management. So we'll do a deep dive into those, and we have, I think, a couple of guests coming along to talk about that. And then, and that is the 25th of April. And then the final one on the 22nd of May will be looking at the idea of the analogy of a river, and the way that sometimes your career can sort of flow, and it can be quite fast in the way it flows. Sometimes it can be slowed down. Sometimes you can have people helping you and, get on a boat, for example, and things will become much quicker. Sometimes you just take a little diversion to the shore or whatever. And we are going to be talking about that analogy a bit more deeply, and how it, and as Jan said, how it gives you that permission to just understand that it's okay that sometimes your career will go slowly, sometimes it will go faster. Sometimes you may take a diversion and it doesn't go anywhere, but at least you have tried. So that will be the subject of the last one. Okay, I think, one question that's just come in from Anonymous. Does the new scheme for apprenticeship SLTs have its own framework, or can they engage with this main one? They are encouraged to follow the same as SLTs generally. So yes, they can use this. It's basically just another route to get into SLT, but it has the same weighting, and people learn the same things, and so they should be using this framework as well. I hope that helps. Okay. Any more before we draw this webinar to a close? Okay. We will put all of those questions together into our FAQs document and share that. We'll also put the recording up online, and we'll share it on our e-news link and also on Twitter as well, sorry, X, so that you'll get all of that rich information at the end. Okay, so can I just ask for your time to do a little evaluation of this webinar, please, so that we can make sure that we're always improving. We just need to scan that code to get to the link. Give you a couple of seconds for that. And if you want to carry on the discussion on X, please do so using that hashtag RCSLT_ProfDev. And it doesn't have to be just about this webinar, it can be about the professional development framework in general. I have just posted a tweet about how you're using it, so please get in touch. We'd love to see what you say. Great, thank you. So I think we're going to draw that to a close now. Thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully you can join us at the next webinar on the 25th of April. Thank you very much. Goodbye.